had to learn the hard way how to deal with people. But I think when we were still just I was leading those teams, that was still okay. But it became more complex when I realized that the teams itself were not really the bottleneck. It was really the management systems around me that were hindering the engineers of doing their job.
It's a conversation. I have been looking forward to this, Jurriaan. I know you have an extensive background in leadership and helping organizations reach their ultimate performance peak, their level. And it's no easy feat at the same time, right? I'm sure we're all probably learning and figuring it out too with the technology that we have, AI, automation. The world is ever changing and ever in flux or evolving. So I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on leadership, how we can grow an organization. But before we dive into all of that, do you mind sharing a little bit with our audience your background and what has brought you to your journey so far?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm a Dutch organizational change agent, author, and speaker. And my background is not organizational or leadership. Actually, it's computers. Funny enough, I worked with computers a lot. I studied computer science. I was a software developer for a long time. But over the years, I became more interested and more obsessed with human problems rather than computer problems. They're more difficult to solve. I think it's not so easy. It's not zeros and ones. It's really a lot more complex, multi-dimensional that in that way. So yeah, I mean, over the years, took on lots of different roles, leadership roles, and then founded my own consultancy a bunch of years ago.
That's awesome. I think that's a neat point that you make about computer science versus leadership and humans. You know, maybe some of the fun or more interesting subjects are the artistic or the psychology, the history, and yet they can be sometimes the hardest to learn and talk about because you're right. When it's science, numbers, math, if you get the wrong answer, you know that you get the wrong answer. But when you're working with people and managing people and you're managing change, well, you're in that situation where you're constantly figuring it out. So I'm excited to hear where did you build those strengths and strengthen that muscle of guiding people and guiding organizations?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think the thing that is a metaphor I sometimes use to give people a sense of the complexity involved is, if you have a system, a computer system, it's like an engine, right? It can actually be fixed. You can train an expert to fix a problem. There's a finite amount of states that the engine can be in. But if you're trying to solve or change the weather, like that's impossible. Only in hindsight we know what has happened, and we can only predict maybe a few hours in the future quite reliably, and everything else is just a fantasy, right? So it's really like the complexity of humans and then groups of humans makes it even more interesting.
Now, what led you into the change management path and how did you learn to lead change?
Yeah, it started by becoming a manager of a group of software development teams. They thought it would be a good idea to promote an engineer to do that. So I had to learn the hard way how to deal with people. But I think when we were still just I was leading those teams, that was still okay. But it became more complex when I realized that the teams itself were not really the bottleneck. It was really the management systems around me that were hindering the engineers of doing their job. Like they were showing up with their craft and trying to do the best thing every day, but the system around them was basically hindering to do that. So I started having conversations, starting to work with the leadership teams and ultimately the CEO of that company. I tried to understand their context. And then I jumped on board on a change program where I was still really junior, but I got guided by some experienced people. So it was really like working alongside others, following my curiosity. I was applying a lot of agile methodologies and agile methods. So inspect and adapt. Don't plan ahead too far. Work with the people, talk to the people instead of managing from your spreadsheets. All those kinds of principles really helped me along the way.
I love agile, so you don't need to convince me of the benefits, but share a little bit with our audience. What is agile just for anyone who might be new to the topic? And so how do you find that it helps in even communicating with teams too and what the maybe the foundation of that is for them.
Right. Yeah. So the Agile Manifesto is over 25 years old, and it's a set of principles written down by a bunch of frustrated software engineers. Basically, they were doing their work, but like I said, like similar to my situation, it was the command and control style hierarchical management that was trying to control what the software developers' output was going to be, that was hindering them from doing great software. So they wrote a bunch of principles. One of them was individuals and interactions, even over processes and tools. So go and talk to people, put the right people together and talk it out rather than trying to put it something in a process diagram or letting a tool run it. But more importantly, it's all about working in short cycles, doing a lot of continuous improvement, reflection, taking away good things, bad things, improving the next cycle. So it's really about continuous steering rather than long-term planning. And this was applied first in the domain of software development. And it became a hype. It became snake oil. Lots of consultants jumped on it. So if you've heard the word agile, it's a really good chance that your eyes are rolling. Like, oh no, not that again. It's really become phenomenon. And I think that there's lots of downsides to how people are using it. But I think ultimately it's all about bringing back the humans into the system. It's about putting the experts in the lead. It's about all the basically, reducing the management nonsense of how we usually work in organizations with the steep hierarchy and all the reporting lines, and replacing that with autonomous teams that are capable of doing their work. And even though I'm not no longer preaching or teaching agile methodologies, all the work I do are based on those same basic fundamental ideas.
Well, I think that brings me to one of the questions I know we're going to get to. Do we still need managers? Are they still relevant? Especially in a constant state of change, too.
Yeah, I think so. And you're asking this because you've probably read that I've worked in a bunch of self-managing organizations, meaning that we had about 500 people in our team in our organization, but we had no managers. Nobody was reporting to anyone, and we figured out a way of how to do it. People were highly autonomous to make most decisions. We made agreements about how things were going. We made agreements about how can we spend money, and if we want to spend more money, great. But this is the process to follow together. So we governed together that organization, so democratic style of management, and it works. Like the job of managing something still exists in a system like that, but it's just solved in a different way. So, and it sounds pretty radical for lots of people that are just working at a normal quote unquote job, to not have a manager. But it was really a glimpse into the future in my mind, and it's also not easy. So when you ask me, do we still need managers? I would say the work of managers is still very relevant, which is often about prioritization, setting guardrails, asking for results, giving guidance. Those things are still super useful and helpful, but we have to be careful of where management goes when it becomes unhealthy, basically, and when it's really about a power game where the manager is either micromanaging or is just making decisions without involving the team, is playing politics. And unfortunately, these are some things that just show up if you run a normal, unfortunately, it's a current normal of a hierarchical system with lots of management involved.
I feel like you and I are aligned that there's no real normal, but maybe a standard or traditional model that we acknowledge and yeah, universally accepted or understood. And hearing what you're sharing, I'm wondering if we also think about management a little bit differently in those situations. So in your past companies and experience, the self management model is really about the task of managing versus having one singular or maybe plural, but at least having one person that everybody is reporting to titled
Right.
the manager.
The boss.
Yeah, the boss. But in your situation, it sounds like you have to have a really strong culture of accountability too. Is that
Mhm.
accurate, would you say?
Yeah, correct. It does require, like, having a manager is easy in a way that if I'm struggling with my coworker and they're doing something I don't like or they're not keeping their promises, I can just go and complain to my manager, and I'm just going to expect that that person will solve it for me. But that's not possible in a self-managing system, right? It's also pretty lazy, honestly. Like, you want to have a system where I can actually go talk to the coworker, hold them to standards that we've agreed on together, and work it out, right? Without the manager needing to be involved. But they can just throw all their complaints on their lap, and they're just going to sit back and expect the manager to solve it out. So those managerial roles are not so nice sometimes unless you're able to build a team. If you're a leader and you're listening to this, great. And you have the opportunity to build a team where people hold each other accountable and give each other feedback. And you should see your role more as a facilitator, and creating the environment so that happens naturally, rather than you being the person redirecting the traffic and basically being the one doing that work for them. So yeah, I agree. Like, culture feedback is important. High level amount of clarity on what is expected is super important to have. And if those conditions are there, then it's a matter of basically unlearning the habits that most people get learned over the years, to just avoid conflict and do what is told.
If you're in an organization where there are managers, there is probably still a possibility and opportunity for you to have a little bit more of that direct accountability and conversation. If we look at our colleagues, our coworkers as peers, and we're all adults, we're all human here, let's have a direct conversation. Let's work something out together versus having to always go to a third party and have them figure it out for us. So if we can take a little bit more ownership around our role, our work, and the communication with our colleagues, I feel like it's possible. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it. What do you think?
I mean, it is possible. It's really the people that have the authority in that system that are able to change it.
Mm.
So most of those systems, actually, in most of those systems, if you work there, you don't have a lot of authority. You have to basically, by default, you can do nothing until you are given permission. And sometimes your job description is the permission that you're working from. But if you go beyond those boundaries, you always have to ask for permission. That's a default system. And that means that if you really want to create a culture of ownership, it's not enough for the leaders to stand on a crate and say, you should take over more ownership. Right? That's just not enough. It should really be demonstrated by action, and it should be demonstrated by changing the system so that people have a lot more authority explicitly, and can also have more autonomy about how they're going to do the work, what work they want to be doing, and those kind of things. And then ownership grows, basically.
Yeah, that's a great point. It would be very hard too if you are in a very strict or tightly structured organization, and you might not get the best positive reaction if you're the loner pushing the
Yeah,
boundaries,
yeah, yeah.
and trying to create that change alone can also be very challenging too. And at the same time, maybe at the very least we could start with having better ownership over our work and how we do at least respond to our coworkers and colleagues. But I hear the word ownership a lot, and I preach it and coach it too, but I like to be mindful that sometimes we overuse words, maybe like agile has been somewhat overused, and we lose what the meaning is, or we forget how to even go about having greater ownership over ourselves. So what does that mean for you, Jurriaan, and how do you help people get to that place?
Yeah, it's really good and important to define ownership before we start talking about it. My colleague, the co-founder of our consultancy, is Koen de Boer, and he says he has an ownership formula, basically. And the ownership formula is ownership equals the level of authority multiplied the emotional investment in the work. So there's basically two dials you can turn on and improve, and like volume buttons, you go up and down. You know what I mean? Um, so level of authority, it's literally like, to what extent does somebody actually have the mandate to make autonomous decisions, right? How much rights does somebody have to decide about something? And that, the baseline is that somebody should have sufficient and explicit authority to fulfill their role. But if you give people more authority, then the ownership grows because people are allowed to make bigger decisions themselves. And if people make bigger decisions themselves, they will naturally feel more ownership, because if someone else is calling all the shots, then how can I feel ownership over that, right? It's their game. The second factor was the emotional investment, and that's about to what extent does somebody actually care about the work they're doing. So if the thing I'm doing is my ultimate fulfillment of life, then it's much easier for me to also feel ownership over it. But if it's like, I really don't care about this project, somebody gave me this project, I hate it, I don't understand why it's useful, it's just what I'm told, then somebody will never take ownership over it. So to create an environment where people take more ownership, what we always teach is, well, you have to do both. You have to, on one hand, give people the authority to do it, and increase that amount of authority within boundaries. It's not chaos. It's not unlimited, but within certain boundaries, you can actually give people more authority. And then on the emotional investment is ask people what they want to do and give them, let them choose what they're going to do. And that sounds extremely scary for a lot of leaders and managers out there, because what if people don't want to do this shitty project, or what if nobody wants to do the dishes? Well, that's obviously a concern to look at. At the same time, what is the cost of somebody doing something without any ownership, without any emotional investment, and they need you to make all the decisions every day? Like, that's costly as well. So, and this can be, and this, there's a lot of companies out there that are proving that this works at scale. So, for example, the company Roche, they run a marketplace where literally everybody in their world. So Roche is a pharmaceutical company that's operating in almost all countries in the world, and it's a client of us. And they have a marketplace where you can put a mission or a problem statement, and you can submit it over there, and you can just ask if anyone else in the world wants to work with you on that problem. So, and that's useful because they're working on a certain types of disease for a certain patient, and they're running into a challenge, maybe combined with their medicine, that it's difficult or it's not working, or there are complications. You can put that on the marketplace, because there's probably someone else at the other end of the world that has already solved this or also acknowledges this problem, and then people subscribe to that mission, and then they start a self-managed team together. They start working on it as a group. Like, there's nobody that has to give a sign off on that. It's just like, if enough people are willing to invest their time, it's probably a relevant thing. So let's go and do it. And they have over 1,000 of those teams across the globe that are just doing this. And that happens naturally. It is the leader's job is to keep the marketplace alive and to enable people to do the work. And it gives them huge return on investment, because these people are now solving highly complex problems across the globe, completely outside of the traditional hierarchy. And you can imagine emotional investment is high. Ownership of that is high. So yeah, just to give you a sense of what's possible.
I'm amazed, and I feel like I should have known there is a formula for ownership, and that just kind of confirms for me even more how much business is an art and a science. And
Hmm.
that's the science part, but then there's an art to knowing how to get the insight and understand your team and ask the right questions, or at least ask questions to have a better understanding of where people want to be positioned. And then you get to craft some really cool projects and really awesome teams that can build better outcomes, because everybody feels a little bit more aligned in what they're doing. And it also makes me think of the word empowered, that I feel like I've overused it. I know.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I'll be first to admit, but I feel like that gets overused and we lose the meaning of that to a degree. Part of that, though, is having the resources or giving people that decision making ability. So how do you approach that in a organization where you aren't developing that self-managed team quite yet, or people don't have the ability to choose what they want to work on and unite in that way that you just described? How do you help at least the more, we'll call it traditional or normal organizations? How do you help them get to a place where people are at least a little bit more, dare I say, empowered, a little bit more empowered and supported to make some really key decisions to help them and the organization move forward?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And it's true. Like, most of our work is not in self-managed organizations, because they don't help us. They don't need our help. At least they do need help sometimes, but not always us. Yeah. Just to respond to the word empowerment first, I used a quote in my book by the former chief talent officer of Netflix, Patty McCord, and she said, "The reason we have to empower people is because we took that power away from them." And she says, like, empowerment is built on the assumption that someone stronger generously shares their power with someone weaker who gratefully receives it, right? But people are already powerful. They do powerful things. They do the important things in their private lives. They get kids if they can. They move to a different city or a different country. They go on vacation. They are doing pretty radical, important stuff as adults. But somehow in the workplace, people need to be empowered, right? It just tells you something about the default system. But just to get that out of the way, I think it starts with the conversation about how much autonomy, because I don't use empowerment because of this reason, right? I use autonomy and talking about the amount of autonomy and the amount of alignment that's needed in an organization. So when we go and talk to a team or a leadership team and we ask them like, what is the thing here? And sometimes they do say like, people are not taking ownership. I'm like, okay, yeah, well, people should already feel empowered because they already are. I'm like, okay, interesting. And then you go talk to the people on the ground and you ask them like, okay, so what is holding you back from taking more initiative, right? Or showing more initiative? What is holding you back from making that decision? And then they share stories about, you know what, some person at one point did that and they made a mistake and their head was bitten off by the leader, publicly, or they were, and even if that happened 5 years ago, people will still remember that kind of that continues throughout the history of the culture. So if somebody new joins the company, it's like, oh yeah. So and then they talk and like, oh yeah, you have to know one thing. Yeah, you have to be very careful with that leader because if you make a mistake, they might fire you because that happened 4 years ago. Or somebody told me that someone was fired some years ago. Yeah, so it's really about there's a trust building between people and the leaders that needs to happen, where it's the people that trust that when they go take initiative and they do something radical and or they make a mistake, that they're not really being, that it doesn't have the consequences that is other than just, oh, interesting, maybe don't do it again and we just learn from it together. And the cultures that do that right, they celebrate failure a lot. And you've heard that before, but actually celebrating it looks like this. There's a Dutch company called bol.com, which is like the Dutch Amazon. It's very similar types of services. And they want to innovate fast, they want to move fast. And what they do is every all hands meeting when they are together uh, at their company, they have an element, it's a recurring element in their session, which is there's going to be one of the leaders, they dress up like a priest and do a little sketch on the podium, and they're going to ask, does anybody here has a confession to make? And and they just laugh about it. They're like, oh yeah, oh, I did something really strange, it was really stupid, and this went wrong, and this was the impact. And we're like, oh, okay, well, and then we just laugh and we clap and high five, and then we have cake and drinks together. So it is not something you can say we celebrate failure, but you have to really cultivate it, and you have to do stuff actively to keep that alive.
I love that. I'm picturing it in my mind's eye, and just the fact that you are creating a sort of jovial, humorous environment probably diffuses a lot of the tension and stress around making those mistakes, or maybe it's a lesson learned, but that's really cool. I'd never heard that before. So I love that. I would be curious of any American companies that would implement that or what that could look like.
Yeah.
Even in a remote setting too, I think about, my company is remote, so you could have a lot of fun celebrating failure and the lessons that are learned in a
Yeah.
variety of ways.
And it's also about leaders going first, modeling that, and just often it's the leader who shares their lessons learned and their failures first, and it's really a trade off. Do you want to have no mistakes or no public mistakes and just not innovate? Right? Is that what you want, or do you want people to try out stuff and to learn stuff and to sometimes take risks and take smart risks, right, within boundaries?
Well, you mentioned the word radical, and I've also heard you share on other podcasts the idea that we maybe say that we're being strategic, but we're not really employing a strategy. And I wonder where the two ideas of being radically accelerated in an organization and then also being very strategic, how do they align? And is there a similarity there at all?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like you say, strategy is also an overused word. We can do the business buzzword podcast if you want.
I would like
Strategy is one of those words which can mean nothing or can mean everything. It's interesting if you go talk to people. And I'm also surprised by how little companies actually have a strategy. So, and I'm literally talking about Fortune 500 companies that if you go look at their strategy, it's not really a strategy, because a strategy is a coherent set of choices that allows you to overcome obstacles or allows you to gain a market position, leverage opportunities is what I mean, to win in your market. If you're a for-profit company, and that means you have to make choices. You have to make explicit trade-offs of what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. And so often strategy is just either a list of fluffy, meaningless words on a slide deck that nobody ever looks at it. This is the new strategy. Oh yeah, synergies. We can go and add all the buzzwords. we're gonna be agile synergies, blah blah blah. Or it's a list of all the projects that people have on their plate, which is more like a task list. But there's something in the middle which is about clarifying what we're going to do and why we think that taking those steps will allow us to be better in the market, to allow us to overcome the obstacles for success, etc. So strategy itself is often a blocker. But then if you have clarified your strategy, if you're clear about your trade-offs, then the trick is to build aligned and autonomous teams to go after and chase after those ideas. So the concept of aligned autonomy is one that I use a lot in the context of radically accelerating and being super strategic, because we're talking about teams that are highly autonomous. We talked about that already, that have a lot of decision rights, that can steer themselves toward that goal. And at the same time, they need to be aligned with the strategy. So they need to have enough understanding of what the strategy is so that they can make the right choices every day in their teams. So you can see how this could work at scale. It's like a bunch of speedboats that are steering themselves, but overarching, we're all moving roughly in the right direction. And there can be deviations. We can go left and right and do some probing to see if there's better ways. But it's the most important thing is that those teams steer themselves. And the leader's job is to create strategic clarity, to create transparency, to accelerate learning, and to create the environment so that those autonomous teams can run themselves without much interference.
No easy feat, for
No,
sure.
correct.
How do you help organizations that need you to remove those roadblocks? And so where do you even begin when you're working with an organization and you haven't been able to experience firsthand the struggle and challenges, but you need to get to know what they're going through to then unpack and start from a place of change?
Yeah. I think a traditional consultant, which we are not, would say, we're going to interview the people and then create a diagnostic report. That's going to take 5 months and $500,000. That's not how we work, but that's how it happens a lot. Let's diagnose first. I really believe in, like I said earlier, going back to the agile principles of putting the people in the room and talk it out. What we do instead is maybe we carve out a day where we put the key people that are influential and have information and not only the highest in rank, but really people from across the organization that have knowledge and information about how things are running, and go and ask them to go through some exercises and ask them, like, what is really holding back this organization from thriving? And then sometimes they'll point at organizational structure. Sometimes they point at unclear goals. Sometimes they point at an unhealthy meeting culture or slow decision making, or a combination of those things. And then with those people, we co-create experiments to run and to go and change those things. So it's highly participatory. I don't bounce back of facilitating 100 or 200 people in one room. We have ways of doing that. And I really believe that going in one room and really trying to talk it out, well facilitated, is a great way to start.
Having 200 people in a room and you are talking it out, I imagine that there could be some things folks are holding on to that even the leaders who hired you and brought you in weren't even aware of. So, how do you handle a situation like that and navigate through that?
Yeah. I think you hit a key point, that leaders are often not aware of what is actually happening in their organization, and they also don't have those conversations for some strange reason, right? They might ask for a report and they might talk to the leaders that report to them, but they don't organize large group conversations because they're obviously they're daunting. If you don't have the skills on how to do that well, large group conversations, they don't work out well often. Going back to your first question about emotions, I think of course we do. Depending on how almost traumatized the organization is, you might get a lot of emotions. However, we often give people a systems lens where it's like, you know what, all the things that happened in the past is because we have an organizational system that is causing us to behave in this way. Nothing that is happening is personal. Everybody's here showing up with the best intentions. And we have to assume that 99.9% of the people that work here try to do their best job every day, but somehow it's not working out. So we have to look at the system that we're using here. So, and that lens really allows people to, to not take anything personal. So it actually creates lots of hope for people, especially if you work there for a long time and you've been facing these problems. It can create a lot of hope that we're now finally talking about the real problems here. And maybe sometimes maybe it's a leader that's misbehaving, that's causing a lot of noise. It's possible, but then again, it's also about why is that leader not being corrected? What's the system that we have in place? What are the principles that are missing that people can just show this behavior? There's lots of systemic things that we can always look at.
With you. And you probably get really great insight from those meetings, I would imagine, that you probably wouldn't get if you did individual interviews and people are secluded from each other and you can't hear the multiple voices. So I think that's
Right.
cool. That in itself is radical.
Yeah, maybe it is. Yeah.
I like that. Well, share a little bit with us about your book Formula X and what it means to reach that extreme acceleration in an organization. Because I think we've probably danced around the idea of accelerating and performing at an organization, and we probably need to first understand what that looks like. If I'm an organization that accelerated and I'm performing really strongly, what does that look like to an outsider who doesn't have any context?
Yeah, so Formula X, as my first book, is built on it's taking lessons from the world of Formula One motor racing. Formula One is the pinnacle of motorsport, and they're known for not only driving really fast, but they innovate the cars at an extreme speed, and that requires thousands of people to build and run just two cars. So I'm talking per team. So yeah, the Formula X book really explores how those teams operate from the inside. But more importantly, it's a business novel. So it's really like a story, a quick fable of a leader that's trying to accelerate their medium-sized company, and he's taking lessons from the Formula One team because he gets inspired, and then overall he struggles, tries to do it the traditional way, and ultimately they succeed. And there's like a very short theoretical chapter at the end for the people that still want some theory. So if you're fond of, for example, Patrick Lencioni's work with the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, it's a pretty famous book, right? It's a very similar narrative style. And for people that really want to dive in and want some practical management advice and lots of practices and ways of working, they can go and pick up a copy of my latest book called Unblock. And the subtitle is Clear the Way for Results and Develop a Thriving Organization.
I love that. Those words, accelerate and thriving, I don't think they get used often enough. I would hope that's what we're after as leaders for our teams, for our business. How do we create a culture that is thriving, that is, to me, accelerated means moving forward with great momentum. And that might not be the best definition, but I could see us all as a company maybe moving in very different directions too quickly, and that's where we get the misalignment. What's the biggest lesson that you would want leaders to take away from reading your book or just from understanding their own organization and how they can start to get into that better, clearer alignment and accelerated path?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's very hard to pick one thing. But I'll try one thing which is a bit overarching, which is advice that I give leaders to stop being the traffic cop on the intersection, right? Redirecting traffic, you go left, you go right, and then being super busy at being in the work every day, and rather to think more like a road designer or road architect, where you like hovering above the system and observing what's happening and trying to figure out why is this not working as well as it could. Why is the work not accelerating from itself? And then bringing ideas of how to shape those roads and shape the work practices every day to build that organizational system that is capable of achieving your ambitions.
I love that. I think that's great advice. And I know we have to wrap up, but if you were to give any kind of advice on where to start with that, because I could imagine I'm in operations myself, and I have my system for reviewing systems. Same time, there can be always a more efficient way or effective way, and there could be folks out there just getting started and feeling really overwhelmed, like, where do I even begin? Maybe it feels like it's all a mess. So how would you counsel anyone to start? Where do I start? What should I be looking at, or who should I be talking to first?
Right. Yeah, it's a bit cheesy, but pick up a copy of my latest book. It has 6 chapters on 6 of the most common organizational blockers. And that includes strategy, that includes decision making, that includes meetings and teamwork. And I would just look at those 6 topics and think about which of these things is just really most block right now. Maybe all of them are somewhat, but if you're struggling with teamwork, maybe start there. If you're struggling with getting faster decisions, go and dive deeper there. If you're struggling with getting actual progress, we'll go and look at this chapter on steering. And then that book has lots of practical things to think about. And the core concept is to pick something you want to change and then run an experiment. Because as much advice as you can get from my book and from other thinkers out there, there's no guarantee that anything that's in there will work for your specific context. And the only way to know is to try it. So there's something in that book is like talking, maybe we do a decision-making process very differently. Well, let's try it out on one decision and make it a safe to try experiment. So instead of asking everybody for permission, like, should we do it? Should we not do it? First of all, consider that nothing is forever. So try it 3 times, try it for 4 weeks, try it only on one team, not doing a big bang on everything, and see what you learn, and then run a new experiment. And then if you go into that muscle of constantly trying to improve your organization in small steps, then you'll build the muscle also to continuously evolve.
I'm going to get my copy. I know you're on Amazon, so I'll be going there. But where can people find you online? How would you like them to connect with you so they can grab a copy of both your books or work with you? What's the best place to reach you?
Yeah, so I'm highly active on LinkedIn. So if you want to connect with me, just type in my first and last name and you'll find me. Both Formula X and Unblock are on Amazon, as you said. The direct link to the Unblock book is unblockbook.net, and our services are at unblock.works.
Awesome. We'll have all those links below for our listeners. Jurriaan, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a blast. We could talk forever. We'll have to have you back because I know there's more to unpack. But in the meantime, thank you to all of our listeners as well. This has been another episode of Bad Bosses, Great Leaders podcast.
Thanks, Rebecca. It was fun.